It's ring posts and retirement villages. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hello, everyone. It's great to have you back. My name is Bob Smith, the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a mess of other wrestling magazines. And this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour with Bob Smith. Thanks for being here. Those in the know me as the Don Felder of wrestling podcasters. Think about it. In any event, we have an award-winning person on our show today. His name is Greg Oliver, one of the great writers. He wrote one of my favorite books in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series. We'll talk about that. He wrote two great books this past year about Medusa Michelli, or I should say he co-wrote with Medusa Michelli and the baseball manager, player, and now coach for the New York Mets, John Gibbons. This man has done it all in sports, in general writing, and thankfully in pro wrestling writing. And he is slamwrestling.net, which is one of my favorite meat and potatoes websites. I really enjoy it like crazy, and I think you ought to check it out if you haven't already. So, hey, enough of my yakking. My knees knocked a little bit talking to this gentleman because I admire him so much, but I hope you enjoy the conversation. It is one of the non-parallel wrestling writers of our time, Greg Oliver. Well, I remember back when I was with PWI, at one point I walked into a Hudson News newsstand at Penn Station, New York with a friend. He said, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "I'll show you." I walked in and I found my name in 17 different magazines that were around. This was about I'd say it was around 1992, 93. I used to write a lot. I just, like you said, I churned out a lot of stuff. Some of it I was proud of, some of it I wasn't, but it paid the bills. And, every time I left wrestling, my phone would ring. So I guess I made a nice reputation. But as for you, I don't know how to describe you other than it's quality, folks. I mean, first of all, Slam Wrestling, I talked to you before about this on another podcast. It is a wonderful wrestling website. It's one of the most wonderful meat and potatoes, no nonsense, great photos, you name it, breaking news, terrific biographies. I don't know what else to say other than I've turned to it for years and years, long before I got a chance to meet you and talk to you. So congratulations on everything that website has accomplished.
It has been a really interesting, 25 plus years, and there are not a lot of websites around that long. And we have the archives of most of our stuff. We had to split ways with the, Sun newspaper, Sun Media, Post Media. They decided to cut us during the pandemic as a cost-saving measure. So we lost some of that content that made us unique, like the Bret Hart column and things like that. But in the end, we realized we still had so much stuff that we own the rights to. And so we just packaged it all up, and it's up there in a new entity on our own as slamwrestling.net. It's a bit of a challenge running your own business as opposed to being paid to run it, which is how it used to be with Post Media. But it's fun, and we're trained journalists. I mean, certainly the two guys at the top, myself and John Powell, we both, went to journalism school. And so we try to look for that. Even our interns, I've got an intern starting in January who's, like a fourth year journalism student. So that means, you're teaching sort of the next generation how to write about pro wrestling. And it really shouldn't be all that different than writing real news or sports news. It just, except in this case, we do sort of know our audience, right? So you don't have to explain what a pile driver is every time. But if you're doing that same piece in McLean's magazine or Time magazine, then you do have to sort of, explain a little bit what some of that stuff is. So,
one of the things I like about Slam Wrestling is and I mean this. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to work for a pro wrestling website. I was approached, and they wanted me to learn one of the most drastic forms of SEO writing I've ever been tasked with doing. And after trying it for a little bit, I stepped away immediately. I didn't care for it. What I like about your site, it doesn't read like SEO to me. Do you have any philosophy on that these days? Because it seems like more and more websites are heading toward blatant SEO style.
It's actually funny. One of my writers actually does this as a day job.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he helps companies with their SEO and search engine and all that kind of stuff. And so he's been trying to encourage us to do a little bit more. And some of it's no-brainer stuff we probably should be doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's like in WordPress, you should always have an alt tag. Pretty basic concept, but we don't do that consistently. So that's the kind of thing we can do going forward to improve with search engine stuff. But by and large, Google has always loved us because it's quality. And when people link to you, that helps a lot. Wikipedia has all kinds of stuff. We still have all kinds of stuff, links we've never updated from the old site, which is just, way too much work. Maybe I'll put that intern to work. But that kind of idea, right? It's quality is really, Google still has value in that, right? Their algorithm still puts a little bit of emphasis that if everybody else is referencing you, then I should too, as Google, the entity. So I think that's a little bit of it. I'd rather just put out quality work than go out there chasing the hits. But to be completely honest, you never know where the hits are going to come from, right? You can write an obit about somebody nobody else has ever heard of, and it can be the top story of the week, of the month, of the year. Like, you just don't know. Something goes viral, nobody else covered that person, and so all of a sudden you have a hit on your hands. I wish I could predict those kind of things, but you can't.
True. I just like the fact that I talked to you about this when I was on the Rizzy podcast as well. You guys do the most incredible job with obituaries. When a talented, even somewhat unknown wrestler dies, or a superstar wrestler, you guys are usually there. You're usually first, and your obits are loaded with facts, figures, and notes about the heroes of wrestling, and it's vital reading every time you do one. I don't know how else to say, but thanks. I mean, it's like when all of my favorite stars passed away, most of my old favorites when I was a kid are gone now. I turned to you guys, and you guys had all the notes I would ever want to read about those stars. So it's a tremendous part of your website.
Meltzer does a great job with his, but they're often a few days later. And I had this discussion with Ross Hart when Gabby Gill Hayes died. And Ross is like, well, you didn't have this title, this title, this title. And it's like, Ross, that was all in the first story when I interviewed him when he was alive. So when I'm writing the obituary, it's about the person. And in this case, it was about how he died. And that was quite interesting and deserved more than just buried in titles. And in the end, these people are more than just titles, right? They're family men, are women, and they've lived interesting lives, probably post wrestling. Not all of them. Some of them have been very much stuck in the wrestling group forever. So I do try to do that whole picture, and I think that's important in any obituary, right? You don't want to just have the highlights. You got to have some of the lowlights, and you got to have the stuff that happened away from the spotlight. True.
And another thing I like about the site, you've had some really good writers on your site. Talk about who you've worked with over the course of the history of the website that you've enjoyed working with.
Steve Johnson, just as simple as he'd read my first book, The Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Canadians, got in touch. He's done just as much great stuff for our website as he has with the books that he and I have written together. But then some guys go on to other things, right? There was one guy named Steve Rennie who worked for us and then, went on to work for, big newspaper chains and things like that. Other guys just, this is just a tiny little hobby for them, right? Is that I love wrestling. I need to work for a living, but I still miss the writing. So I can do that. So there's a balance of the people doing it. There's no favorite writer by any means. And I also like the fact that I've generally kept the door open. So a guy may not have written for me for 3 years, and then he gets an idea or a little bug he wants to do and he gets in touch, sure, of course, we're happy to do it. We've tried to pay everybody. It's been a little bit harder to do in the current circumstances, being out on our own, but we try. And I think that's the important thing. People appreciate honesty in the end. You don't promise them the moon if you can't deliver.
Oh, yes. As someone who's been on a payroll, I can certainly understand that. It's really funny. Back when I was at PWI, I developed some friendships with a lot of wrestlers, and I was shocked to find out that what I was making in salary the year I left PWI was more than one of my best wrestler friends was making in the NWA. And I said, that can't be true. I said, that can't be true. And he said, I insisted it's true. So here I am, a schlub working in Rockville Center, working for Stanley Weston and all that stuff. And I'm finding out that I'm making more than a guy who appears on TV every week. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that could possibly work, but it was, it's a funny world out there, professional wrestling. And you're, I hate to use this term, but you're a legitimate sports writer. You've done a lot of work with hockey and other sports and baseball. I mean, you worked with John Gibbons with your book, Gibby Tales of a Baseball Lifer, which was a good seller in Canada, I understand. Are you a wrestling writer how do you describe yourself? I just look at you as a sports writer who happens to write about pro wrestling.
I'm working on a book now with essentially a private citizen who's hired me to write her life story. There's no sports in it. Other than the fact that, she may go hiking or likes to drive her boat. She was not anybody famous by any means, but it's a fascinating story. And I like that challenge, right? I like being able to tell people stories, no matter what walk of life they've come from. But the wrestling guys have always been fascinating. And it's interesting because you talk to the hockey guys or the baseball guys, their job is not to self-promote. Right? Their job is to I'm a team player. I got lucky on that goal. I was in the right place at the right time. I saw that, I guess, the right pitch or whatever it may be, right? They're told to be humble, and yet, they're amazing athletes and among, 300 best players in the entire world, right? And in hockey, right? And then you go to wrestling, where their very job depends on them being egotistical, promoting themselves, talking themselves up, and all these kind of things. So you have to take everything they say with a grain of salt while they're active, especially. Then they go and retire and they open up a little bit more and tell crazier stories. And then a lot of them are probably a little bit more exaggerated because they told the same story so many times that they believe it. But you got to roll with it sometimes, right? You can't fact check some of these stories. You sort of just know that wrestling is by and large tongue in cheek. And people accept that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, with wrestling, you sort of have a little bit of not holding your nose, but you sort of just go, yeah, that's not quite on the up and up there. And then the other thing about the wrestlers that I will say is that they live truly independent lives, right? When you talk to a hockey player or baseball, football, whatever, they had to go town to town. Yes, they did a ton of travel, but they were always under the auspices of the bigger company, right? So they've got their managers there. They've got the traveling secretary. They've got maybe the masseuse, whatever it is, right? Looking out for them. And the wrestlers have none of that, right? It's like you be to this town by this point and the rest of the day is yours. And so they live this freedom, this craziness, things like, the one wrestler telling me, oh, I could have a beer every 10 miles and be fine and have no regret about that, right? He just said, oh yeah, that's just what we did. Whereas today's society just looks out and goes, what, really? How did you survive? How are you still here?
Yeah. I get the feeling today's stars are a little more health conscious than the old timers were because their schedules are different too.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, they don't work quite as much by any means. They have a much more balanced schedule. Well, I mean, even as simple as WWE announced, they're not doing shows over Christmas. What a unique thought. Who knew? You mean you're looking out for these people as human beings? And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that with this Endeavor deal with WWE, that it's going to be a little bit more corporate, a little less Vince McMahon work at all costs. And I think that's going to be for the benefit of the wrestlers. And that crossed my mind just the other day when I can't even remember why now, but it did cross my mind that, yeah, Vince, drove these guys to such extremes. Work or you're not worth it to me. Whereas in a bit more of a corporate world, there'll be a little bit more leeway, a little bit more health consciousness, and I think it's going to be better for all of pro wrestling.
It is astounding. From the time I worked in wrestling, I always say I left covering it full time around 1994 or 5. But it's astounding to me the difference in what a professional wrestler did then and what they do now. Back then, you had the monthly house show and in regular cities that took place every month of the year, and in many different cities for both the NWA, let's say, and the WWF. Now they travel, but they don't have regular stops anymore. That's entirely different. So the travel isn't as crazy. You and I have both talked to wrestlers about the 2 or 3 stop day back in the 70s and 80s. You would actually do 3 spots in a day. It would be crazy. TV followed by an afternoon show, followed by an evening show. So I'm just hoping that it's leading to a healthier lifestyle for everybody and more longevity, to be honest with you, because although, the fact that they work so hard bothers me a little bit. I mean, if you watch a pay-per-view now, what's your opinion on this? Will you watch a pay-per-view now? I'm sure you do from time to time.
Not often.
Really?
Often.
Okay. Or even if it's an episode of Raw or something like that, okay? I think these guys are working way too hard. I mean, taking risks in the ring that I've never seen before as the natural course of business. And you have an opinion on that?
It was sort of the Ring of Honoring of wrestling, right? Where it was high spot, high spot, high spot. And then finally there might be a finish at some point. And that just is sort of what we evolved to. And I think it's a bit ridiculous. And everybody could deal with slowing down a little bit. As simple as, I was at an indie show here in Toronto called Demand Lucha, and Jack Cartwheel was there. I don't know if you've seen this Jack Cartwheel kid. He's out of California. He was a football player, a small guy, like a Division III school, I think it was. And anyways, he was talking to a guy, like a veteran like Sam Adonis, right, who's Corey Graves' brother and was on Top Down in Mexico. And so Sam just told him to slow down a little bit. And he did. So his cartwheels, and he does a lot of cartwheels, which is his gimmick, and it's fun. But he realized he can get as much pop out of doing a cartwheel as he could out of doing like some crazy hurricanrana thing through 8 tables. It's all about the timing, and it's about what they do in the ring. And that's been lost a little bit. So it's good to know that there are some young kids still hearing that and occasionally slowing down. But there's got to be good teachers, expressing that desire or that intention. You got to slow it down, listen to the crowd, be a part of the moment, not thinking about the next 8 moves you have planned out.
What bothers me, though, is that when you look at today's indie scene, and this isn't a blanket statement, but it goes on far too often, is that they don't get the good training. They don't have the good psychology or philosophy. And it's always, like you say, high spot, dangerous high spot, jump off a ladder, jump off a balcony, jump onto the ring apron. I see clips all the time of young wrestlers doing things in a high school gymnasium that they really shouldn't be doing. I just think it's like just a clock ticking. There's going to be a catastrophic injury somewhere in this country at an indie show because they're overdoing it, man. I just can't help but I've always had a lot of respect for wrestlers as athletes, and I just get the feeling that the philosophy in the indies is really, really warped right now. I don't know what else to say about it.
You go out and you emulate your favorite NFL player, but you're not doing the crunching each other. You're practicing the quarterback, right? You're practicing some of the running routes. You're doing the fun stuff, not the grunt work. So yeah, there's a little bit of that for sure. The wrestling's gotten a little bit too nuts. And the indies, again, most of the places don't have regulation anymore either, which is a big part of it. As much as it opened things up, and all of a sudden more people could promote, but there's so many more wrestlers, and therefore there's so many more people not trained, and there's so many more accidents waiting to happen.
Totally agree. It's a sad state of affairs, but I hope, people come to their senses before too long. But anyway, you've had a nice year. First of all, congratulations on the John Gibbons book. I understand that did very well in your native country. And what was it like working with John? Who, by the way, just got hired by the New York Mets, so he's back in baseball.
Yeah, I had to keep that one a little bit quiet for a bit too. So the Gibby was exactly what you think he would be. He laid on the couch for like 3 days and told stories. There wasn't a lot of beer drinking. Like let's be honest here. It was a lot of water. But it was really fun and exactly sort of what you want these kind of working with a famous person kind of thing to be. And he had the time for it at the time because pandemic and all that kind of stuff. There wasn't a lot of baseball. He was working as a scout at the time, and there wasn't a lot of scouting to do. So from that perspective, it's been great. He not an incredible self-promoter. Again, back to my point, what we just talked about, right? He's never been taught that he's got to get out there and hustle, right? To get out there and do every podcast and go to these shows and sit at the table and talk with people. And then, Medusa's been up here to a couple just up here in Ontario, and I go and hang with her, and that's exactly what she does, right? That's just second nature to her, to hustle, to chat people up, to, talk to get your selfies, talk to the people with the babies and chat. It's just, she loves it. So again, that's that wrestler sort of extrovert kind of thing versus the actual team player who has learned to keep the ego in control.
Right. Yeah, two different worlds too. Absolutely different worlds. Even though he had such great success, John Gibbons did as the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays. Is he held in his high regard in Toronto? As I get the feeling he is. Being that I'm not there, I don't really know. Is he considered like a all-time hero with the Toronto fans?
I think in many ways Cito Gaston, nobody compares to him because we won us two championships.
Mm-hmm.
But and they're both from San Antonio. That's a neat little fact. But no, so he's sort of the second level right guy after Cito Gaston. But it was his personality, right? He was just so easygoing. He wasn't some tight corporate guy. He wasn't some guy who didn't know how to communicate, right? He knew how to talk to the fans. He knew how to talk to the media. He just portrayed this guy that you sort of would like to sit down and have a beer with. And that's really who he is. So I think that's why he's partly held in great regard. And there's the success, sure, but it's also that baseball lifer idea, right? That he's been around the game his whole life. He didn't really make it as a player, a lot of injuries, and then got stuck behind Gary Carter in those 86 Mets years. So they see a lot of the grind in him too, right? And you respect that he put in all these years and he's still at it and he still loves the game, and hence he's working for the Mets.
Persistence pays off in this regard, I think. It's nice to see him back. There was a lot of talk about him getting perhaps a managerial nod, but this is the next big thing, so I'm really glad to see him back in New York. Now, your other book this year is The Woman Who Would Be King, the Medusa story, which was quite a read in that. Boy, there weren't any punches pulled in that book, and
there were. Come on,
yeah. But I learned so much about her earlier life that I had no conception of at all. It was a fascinating read, and I'm just wondering what it was like putting that book together.
Well, for the record, I was doing both Gibby's book and Medusa's book at the same time, which was insane. I would not recommend that on anyone. and two differing personalities you couldn't have. However, they were both very professional. So if we set a time to talk, we could talk and get her done. But yeah, Deb became a dear friend. It took a while to earn her trust, for sure. And in fact, I still don't think I have 100% of her trust. I don't think that's possible for her. But she keeps so much close to her chest, and even all the venting that seemed like that book was at times, it still could have been way worse. And part of my job was reining her in, trying to balance, actual facts with, what a rant might be and, legal issues and all those kind of things. And that's where the experience comes in. And it's all well and good that these guys are out there writing all these books, and there's 1,000 books on wrestlers these days. But it's that trained knowledge, right? And it comes from working in a newspaper for a decade, going to journalism school, working in publishing, writing my own books and running the Slam site. Like all these things sort of add up that I know I bring a lot to the table when I'm writing. And I think Deb's book is among the best things I've ever written. I'm really proud of it. Medusa had a crazy ass story for sure. But to be able to switch from going to writing about the wrestling, which I knew, to learning about monster trucks, there are no books for adults about monster trucks. So I had to learn a lot of it from scratch and be able to explain it to people. Learning about raising wolves, like things you just didn't expect to do at all. And then there's the whole, all our issues with pregnancy and not being able to get pregnant, and even getting a couple of adoptions taken away at the last second. And again, you have to walk some of that stuff back because it obviously deals with privacy. But it was just a crazy story, and that she's still going and still as hard-headed as she is and just living life. She's a truly remarkable woman. And the hope was the book would really hit outside of wrestling. And it's been really strange because the monster truck world, the motorsports world, has basically ignored it. She hasn't done a single podcast related to motorsports.
Really?
Isn't that really bizarre?
That is bizarre.
It's like, here's somebody who spent 19 years driving monster trucks. Now, not all of it in Monster Jam, which was at the time the big company.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, you'd think they'd want to hear it. But I think there's a lot of that head in the sand stuff that pro wrestling used to be like. And it came out of it at some point. And I know we had a small part in that just through the days of the internet, because Slam Wrestling being backed by Sun Media and the Toronto Sun, we had a little bit more pull than a lot of these places, so that we could fight at WrestleMania and say, this is ridiculous. You have to turn on the phone lines so we can file a story. Like, these are all the way journalism was not treated very well over the years in the wrestling world, because, again, they want to control the narrative. They want to tell the story they want to tell. And if I'm coming in as an impartial journalist trying to tell the story I see, it's not always going to line up with what they see or what they want told, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly imagine that, particularly with the big companies, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And we were just talking about that a little bit today with one of my photographers. And thank you for mentioning the photography at Slam. Not a lot of places want to deal with the photography because it's a hassle, right? You have to get your guys in there. You have to get all the photos. You have to organize it all. But I think it makes our site look so great. I have some amazing photographers, and some of them are sort of semi-pros, right? They do other things, and other guys, I do have actual professionals. So we just had AEW in Montreal, and a photographer there, actually shoots the Montreal Canadiens games or F1 or the All-Star or the Hockey All-Star game. So he does all this stuff, and then he goes and shoots the wrestling. So his quality and what he expects out of dealing with the wrestling people is already way higher than anything close to what he gets, right? He's used to the PR people at these, the NHL or F1 or whatever it may be. And then you go to wrestling and it's so, rinky dink isn't quite the right word, but it's not on that level for sure. And wrestling's got a lot of growth to go with there. And maybe Endeavor buying WWE is going to be part of getting it to the next level.
But I'll tell you what, I've never thought in my wildest, I always tell the story about Ric Flair regaining the NWA World Championship at the Meadowlands around 91. And one of the first return cards to the New York area in a long time. And the only reporters there were Apter and myself and a couple guys that I'd never heard of. Now there are press conferences after big WWE events. I never thought I'd see the day. I never thought I'd see the day when Forbes has a wrestling writer. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like I was such a specialty when I was working in the business back in the day. Now it's commonplace. Every newspaper seems to have a wrestling column too.
Well, but it's also because, they get the hits, right? I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, that's partly why all these things have coverage, is because, they can put those stories up and people are going to click on them, and they may have a little bit more life than, this guy got traded or this guy's on the injured reserve, right? So like Sports Illustrated being a good example. Are those guys the same quality as others out there? Yeah, they're a step up. Certainly the guys, your Justin Barrassos and some of them, compared to a lot of the bait and click sites we talked about, who call themselves wrestling journalists. But a wrestling journalist doesn't go to a press conference and clap. There's no cheering in the press box.
Exactly right. Thank you for that.
Frustrates me to no end. Like, okay, you're there and the guys come back from fighting cancer for 2 years and now he's back and does a press conference. Okay, maybe that's a time to clap. That I can sort of accept. But the fact that, MJF comes out, no, that's not a clappable thing. And he's playing along, right? It's all just bait and switch, and then you tease the other, reporters that are there, and it's not real good journalism by any means, and it really needs to change. It's so stupid.
Hey, listen, I used to cover baseball and the NBA too, and let me tell you, one time I had a non-writer with me in the press box at Citi Field.
Okay.
And after it was all over, she turns to me and goes, "That's the dullest thing I've ever done." I said, "They're working. We're all working. It's like we're not kibitzing, we're not goofing around. We're paying attention to what's happening on the field, and we're working. We don't cheer, nobody applauds. It is what it is. We're serious about our work."
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't have fun, and you certainly
Right.
get to know the other people.
But that's what the commissary's for, though. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
You know.
But even that concept too, right? Is if you pay your $10 or because back in the day it used to be free, right? They would give the media a little bit of a spread beforehand at the games. Now it's maybe there's like you have to do your $10 or whatever it is. If you're not a regular person, that's fine. But that's a chance to you sit around, you chat, you maybe get a couple of scoops that way, or you get a lead that you didn't know you needed. That's what any business is about, right? Is contacts. And that's a lot of that's gone with the idea of just everything online, for sure. With a 17-year-old in my house, I can tell you how much online stuff he does when what you really need to do is get out and be there in person, right?
Right. Absolutely agree with that. I miss those days, I will admit it. So what is life like for you right now in a changing media world? I mean, I'm sure you're always looking for your next opportunity to write books, like you just described that you're going to write a book with a non-athlete. What's life like for you now? And by the way, I just want to blow a little smoke at you. The Heels is my favorite wrestling book of all time from his classic Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series. First of all, he had Brower on the cover, and Brower's one of the first wrestlers I ever saw when I was like 10 or 11 years old. So I was always like in awe of him to start with. But first, it was one of the most enjoyable compendiums of history I ever read, and it got me hooked on a lot of your other work. So I just want to give you the thumbs up for that, and tell people that if you ever read that one or any of the books in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series, go out and get them because they're good. They're a lot of fun.
But to that end, like I look at it now and I cringe a little bit. I mean, I know how much better a writer I am now, and I think Steve would say the same thing. So then you get things like the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Storytellers, which was the last one we did in the series, and how much better written it is, how much better researched it is. It may not be something that everybody notices, but it sure is how something I noticed. And you just know the stories that you can chase. And again, partly it's technology, right? In the last 10 years, think of how much more online access we've gotten for, old newspapers, right? Back then in 2005, it was 2007, Heels came out. There weren't like this plethora. Newspapers.com really didn't exist in that sort of depth by any means.
Right.
And so, yeah, the way we've changed things is pretty great. But yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. But all of them, I'm proud of all of them. But yeah, the storytellers, like I said, so everything builds. And the storytellers couldn't have been done if we hadn't done Tag Team Heels, Canadians, and the Heroes and Icons, which is the way to include good guys and anti-heroes and stuff. And we sure looked brilliant putting CM Punk on the cover, didn't we? Because he's still relevant all these years now.
Yeah, no kidding. Prescient. Another fascinating thing about your career also is the fact that you've done a lot of hockey, right? Am I right about that?
So I've done all that, and I never worked in sports. I knew all the sports guys. I was a big sports fan. And it was a glorious time to be working at the Toronto Sun newspaper because the Leafs were in the playoffs. The Raptors were just around the corner from starting. You had the Blue Jays were championship material at the beginning of the 90s. You had the Argos were really a big deal with John Candy and Gretzky and Bruce McNall all owning the team. It was just a great time to be alive as a sports fan. But yeah, I never did sports. It's really odd. And then, things changed. I did a lot of wrestling stuff. I did some sports stuff while I was at the website for the Sun. And then I just said to my editor at ECW Press one day, it's like, I got to do something else. I'm a little bit stuck in this wrestling rut. And so we came up with the idea of Don't Call Me Goon, which was writing about hockey goons. And that led to me writing a little bit for the Hockey News. It led to me finding the Society for International Hockey Research. So I met a whole bunch of new friends there. And, again, the history aspect is always fascinating. It's always more interesting than the guys currently playing. So that was a lot of fun to learn all that and get better at it. And yeah, no, it's a good gig. I can't say I'm a hockey writer full time by any means, but I've had some good stuff out there, and nothing compares. I mean, you're a sports fan too. I mean, nothing compares when you actually get to talk to your idol, right? You're on the phone with Daryl Sittler. It's like, my captain, oh my captain. I mean, I'm a 9-year-old again watching the Leafs, and there's Daryl Sittler. So it's been a really great time. And then the other story I often tell is, oh yeah, I tell my son, hey Quinn, let's skip school this afternoon and go meet Bobby Orr. So you get these opportunities that most people don't get, and I feel truly blessed.
I bet you do. I feel blessed too. I'll tell you a little bit about my journalism career. I fluked into a job with my hometown newspaper in, I'd say it was around 1982, 83. And right at that time, there was a young man across the street in the Catskill Boxing Club named Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Okay. And after about a year with the paper, I was with the Catskill Daily Mirror, a very small paper in Greene County in upstate New York. I was named sports editor after about a year of working there, and I started, and that's right around the time when Tyson turned pro. He was 19 years old. And I wrote an article called Tyson at 20, What the Future Holds, blah, blah. It was a straight Q&A, and I won a major journalism award for that piece from the New York State Newspaper Publishers Association. 18 months later, I submit that to the London Publishing Company in Rockville Center, publishers of KO and Ring magazines, and of course Pro Wrestling Illustrated. 18 months after I wrote that, I was with the staff at PWI. I am the luckiest son of a gun. It's like, I was always a wrestling geek too, so they hired me as a kind of a hybrid boxing wrestling writer. But I actually went to them after a while and said I'd rather do the wrestling. They said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I'm really into the wrestling. I was only into boxing because I was around Mike Tyson a lot." They said, "Okay, we'll give you a shot doing that." I was there for 6 years, so so to me, my whole career was a doggone fluke. It was like, how the heck do you get that lucky?
Well, you come in contact with these heroes, right? Like, and I've laid out probably 40, 50 books. And so I get to work with Bud Collins, or you get to work with Frank DeFord. I got yelled at by Peter Jen, who wrote North Dallas 40. So all these kind of little experiences mean a lot more to me in some ways than the fact that, I've interviewed, whoever it may be, right? The Undertaker or this or that. Like, but to a wrestling fan, it's like they want to know that kind of stuff. But to somebody who's actually loves writing, it means a lot more that I've gotten a chance to do some of those other things. Yeah. Right? You get to sit down with Neil Gaiman, and interview him over tea. Like, come on. Like, how do these other things compare? They don't.
How do you feel about the craft? One of the things I'm so indebted to a couple of guys named John Griffin and Jim Harris, and people I worked with in my early stages of writing, of learning to be a newspaper writer the right way, is the nuts and bolts of good writing. And I really took it to heart from the minute I started doing it. I try to carry those skills with me to this day, even though I don't write as much as I used to. How do you feel about, I guess, the craft of writing and editing, as a matter of fact? Because to me, I enjoy them both so much, knowing that I could do it on a professional level. And what's your stance on that? Is it the content, or is it the actual nuts and bolts of putting something together and getting it out there?
So you got to have that desire to go to work every day. And that goes for most people. But I do love the editing process. I love working with, that's why I'm happy to work with the journalism schools, right? Mm-hmm. And I can give these kids a much better experience because they're thrown to the wolves in a way. It's like, okay, here, I need an obit by tomorrow, and this guy go. And you're working a little bit hand in hand with them, but they have to do so much of themselves. And then you work with them to make it better. But you're also building a package, right? You got to do the art. You got to do some of the links. You got to do all those things that you need on the internet. And hopefully those are skills that they can take with them down the road. But yeah, the actual art of writing has suffered a lot because there's less places to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as simple as, oh, well, how many words can I do on your site when I do a piece? It's like, well, 700 to 1,500 is sort of the sweet spot. You get too much past that, it's ridiculous. And yet we still run longer pieces than that. But that's what you're telling people. So it's not like we're getting a lot of, feature length pieces that are going to run in the New Yorker. And I'm not sure I'd want to do that either, right? Again, that's not necessarily my forte. But then I've done a lot of books. So I don't know, right? It's out there. It's just not appreciated the way it used to be. And that's certainly a bit of a bummer. But there's not a lot you can really do about it. You just keep on keeping on.
Well, this is how I know I'm an old guy, because I'll pick up any local newspaper these days and I want to throw it sometimes because the tenets of good news writing have seemed to have flown right out the window in terms of grammar and syntax and style and professionalism. I see things that are in even the New York Daily News. I'm like, how in the world did they not stop this from getting into print? Because it almost seems like junior high school newspaper writing. It's so bad. And I'm not damning anybody. I'm not cursing anybody out here. I'm just saying that the things that were beaten into my head learning to be a good news writer and editor seem to be passe now. Did you notice that too, or is it just me? Is it just me screaming like, get off my lawn,
No, it's old man shakes hand, at cloud. For sure. Just because, I mean, it isn't what it used to be. But I mean, it's the same if you watch TV, right? It's like, Norman Lear, who just passed. I mean, would he be watching today's television and saying, this is not what I would have done? Yeah, of course. Like, things are supposed to change. However, there's a lot of things that have been dumbed down and simplified, and the newspapers themselves are shorter, right? They're not as big. They don't have as much advertising dollar. All those things add up, and it's just not the same. But you learn to live with it. I have so many people that I still know when they're in the news business, but I don't think I have any desire to go work at a newspaper on a daily basis. I probably could have, but I'm fortunate that my wife's always had a good job. I raised our kid as the stay-at-home dad to the point that, let's skip school. Let's go see Bob New York. So, all those things sort of pay off. And I don't feel like I switched the work-life balance too far in either direction. I had a good little balance and I'm quite happy with the way things turned out. And and that's a good way to look at it, right? In the end, you're leaving a legacy of books, but you're also leaving a legacy of a kid. So what takes precedence? They're all my babies, but only one of them's going to pay for me to be in a home, and that's that's not from royalties.
Oh, that's funny. But it's so much fun for me to talk to another writer, particularly one like you, who I admire so much, because I talked to Brian Solomon recently, who I did you read his Chic book by any chance?
I did.
Did you enjoy it as much as I did? I thought it filled in a lot of the gaps that I really wanted to know about the Chic my entire life, to be honest with you.
It was good, but not great. In the sense that it's really 15, 20 years too late, right? There's so many more people that could have, would have, should have been talked to that aren't around anymore. And because I knew that, because I talked to so many of them, because I've been doing this so long, that you knew that there was those holes. And it's not necessarily Brian's fault. It's just sort of, you just know that this book could have been that much better, a little bit more insightful, and a little less stat heavy. And it wasn't like this guy won this, won that, but it was a lot of going place to place to place. And that's what he had to work with. But for a lot of people, that's what they love about wrestling. But to me, I'm a storyteller. That's the way I see it. I want to tell stories about these guys as people and about as wrestlers or hockey players or whatever they may be. So I want to tell those stories rather than get bogged down in the minutia. And it goes back to that point where Ross Hart said, well, the title list wasn't in this. obituary. Well, I'm telling the story of this guy at the end. That's more important to me than, that he won this title in a work sport. So it's not like it's, the end all be all that he was the champion. So I think just in general, wrestling fans get caught up. Well, but I mean, that's the whole point. There's room for somebody who loves the championships and who won that. They love the details on the arenas. And then there's other people that love the actual dirt, right? And the stuff that happened. Or I love talking to people. So there's room for all of us for sure in pro wrestling. And Brian put out an extraordinary book that, like I said, it would have been an even greater book if you could have done it 20 years ago. Imagine the Gorilla Monsoon one too, like he's working on now. It's like, well, Gorilla's been gone a long time. You really are recreating somebody from scratch in that case.
It's going to be a daunting task. But, I have a weird way of looking at wrestling. A lot of my contemporaries were like, oh, I got to hang out with this guy, or I learned about this guy, and this, I drove this guy, this place, and all this other stuff. My big thing, even when I was working with PWI, was I wanted to learn wrestling psychology. I wanted to learn more of it from the promotion style and the Booker style, or Booker's point of view, rather than, chumming up to these guys. I don't know if that makes any sense. I wanted to learn the nuts and bolts of the business and how it worked, as opposed to the people, the stars, getting to know the stars more. I had a funny way of looking at things. What's been your philosophy in terms of covering wrestling? What's your mindset? Let's say when you sit down to talk to someone about a moment in history, or if you're doing a book with a wrestler. I do find that your style of writing, you really delve into the personalities away from the ring more than a lot of writers do, and I got to give you credit for that. I don't know how you get this out of the wrestlers. Like you will talk to daughters of late wrestlers in some of your books, talking about their experiences and stuff like that. So, whereas I'm more into the nuts and bolts of what makes the wrestling promotion work, I think your style is more getting to the nuts and bolts of the wrestlers as actual people, as opposed to wrestlers. Am I reading that right?
A little bit. I mean, it's not always the case, or sometimes you can't get that, right? So you don't have that in there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's maybe too raw or too personal, and you can't include it. That doesn't happen very often, but I don't know. I just try to always get the bigger picture. That's really the only way I look at it. But I love talking to these guys, and the thing is, once they realize what you're talking about, they open up a little bit more, and that's a big part of it. Is that if you show, though some guys they'll hold your hand and explain it to you, but if you also know their business and their friends and all these things about them, then you've shown them respect. And some of the favorite things ever, a couple of my favorite interviews were non-wrestling ones, was at the end of interviewing both Timothy Zahn, who is a famous science fiction author, and he'd just done all the new Star Wars reboots, Heir to the Empire, which is a little bit what they just did with the Ahsoka. And then I interviewed Ralph Bakshi, who was an animator and stuff, mm-hmm. right? And at the end of it, both of them said, thank you for being so prepared, right? Because I was asking them all these about old stuff and this and that. So they're not getting the same old question.
Right.
And I like to think that's what I often bring to the wrestling thing, is that I've done enough legwork, or I know enough, and a lot of it's off the top of my head because you have been writing about it 35 years, is that you're going to surprise them with things and make them think. And that makes it a lot more fun. You get denial sometimes, but when you get a couple people telling you one story, there's an element of truth to it. And then this guy doesn't want to talk about it. That's fine. But it part of it's the thrill, right? It's like, oh, I got to ask him that and see what happens. You just don't ask them the really, really tough ones right off the bat, right? You want to build up that trust a little bit to the point that they maybe will tell you some things that you weren't expecting, or some things you really wanted to know and didn't get a chance to ask somebody else.
Well, I'll tell you what, Greg, I just want to say thank you for entertaining me, for educating me. I was reading your stuff a long time. We had the opportunity to meet each other about a year ago, I guess. And I admire what you've done. I admire what you're doing, and I get the feeling the best is yet to come. I don't think your quest is quite finished yet. Am I right about that?
I, there are days I definitely think I should go get a real job.
No, you don't. You
Yeah.
don't want to do that.
If only to pay off the house and have my own spending money and not have to ask my wife for money. But things ebb and flow, right? Some days are good, some days are bad. Today was a bad day, so it was nice to chat with you today, Bob. It was a tech issue day, right? And that's the other thing you deal with. We don't have an IT company department to come fix everything. You got to do a lot of it yourself, and that eats into your day, and that could be frustrating. And it's solitary, right? That's the thing about writing that a lot of people you forget, right? It can be a bit lonely. Fortunately, I have my whiskey called Writer's Tears. It's a great Irish whiskey. When I need it, and I try to reward myself if I've done something particularly stressful or whatever. But yeah, it's a lonely world out there doing the writing, and so you need to balance it out with other real life stuff, right? Whether it's going to yoga class, which I try to do a couple of times a week or whatever, just to do something else and get out there. And I think a lot of wrestling fans forget that, right? Wrestling is not the end all be all, right? Hockey, same thing. Hockey is not the end all be all. You need to have a full life. And that includes whatever's important to you, whether it's religion, whether it's being out there in nature, whether it's your family, whether it's collecting stamps, like whatever it is you're into, try to find that balance with some of your passions.
I will say this, though, on a personal level. I only left PWI because they moved to Pennsylvania. I wasn't fired. We didn't have any problems with each other. The problem was it was pre-internet, pre-cell phones in 91,
Right.
92, 93. So you literally had to be in an office to work at a magazine, and I couldn't do it. I just bought property in the New York area. I couldn't leave. There's no way I could have went even if I wanted to go there. So I had to wave it goodbye, and I felt snake bit. But I did work freelance for a few other magazines for the next 7, 8 years or something like that. But the fact is this. I finally threw my hands up in the air, said, that's it, no more of this. And I walked away from the wrestling scene for the better part of 3 decades. When I went on John Rizzi's podcast last year, I was shocked at the number of people who not only remembered me, but remembered the work that I did. It was like a lift in my shoe. I can't tell you the feeling that gave me. It gives me the feeling that I've had since I started this silly little podcast, in that people remembered and valued what I did. And I was only with PWI for like 6 years. I wasn't Bill Apter or Craig Peters or one of the more famous names there, but they remembered me. And that was so gratifying that I decided to just kind of dive back into things and look back at the nostalgia for my old days. I think that in the years to come, people are going to feel that same way about you, that they're going to say, man, when I bought that book, I learned so much about, the tag teams, or I learned about the Canadian wrestling scene, or whatever it may be, or Medusa, or whatever work you've done. I guarantee you that someday, not long from now, somebody's going to walk up to you and go, man, I really liked what you did. And I'm sure there'll be a lift in your shoe too.
Because if you become a bit of an expert, a historian, you get on some of these, documentaries or whatever. And so I was on the one that they did with Tiger Jeet Singh. It's called Tiger with an exclamation point. And it aired on TVO, which is sort of the Ontario public broadcaster. But they also ran it in a whole bunch of different languages. But the funny thing was, when I got to Tiger's house the one time around Christmas, his wife kept looking at me going, I know you. Where do we know each other from? It's like, I don't know. We've never met. And eventually she put 2 and 2 together. It's because Tiger Jeet Singh loved to run that documentary of himself in the house. And so I would be in the documentary. So she'd seen me on that documentary so many times, but we'd never met. So that speaks to what we talked about a little bit earlier, right? You got to have that ego as a pro wrestler. And, as a writer, that's not that important. But then that led to me being recognized once on the city bus because he'd seen me on the TVO show. So, it's great to be recognized, but it's more important to be nice, right?
Absolutely. I agree. Life's short. Leave a pleasant footprint behind you, I always say. It's like, there's stuff I could gripe about too. I choose not to. I'd rather just try to stay positive as best I can in this world that we're living in, especially these days, So, and life is short. I found that out too. So, I don't know how much longer I got being outdated and whatnot at my age. So we'll see what's still percolating in the days and months to come. But right now, I am just thankful that you found it worth your time to come on my little podcast here, and I really appreciate it. The show's been going great. I'm sure that people are going to enjoy hearing what you had to say on this one. What's coming up you have anything in the future? And please, the forum is yours to tell people how to get a hold of you or how to find your work.
Of course. No, thank you. So oliverbooks.ca is where I have my wrestling stuff. Your outdated wrestling fans would probably like some of the old 1970s iron-ons that I have access to. They came out of Al Tomko's basement, actually, at one point when he moved from Winnipeg to Vancouver to start promoting out there in the 70s. So I have a whole bunch of those available there at oliverbooks.ca. I run slamwrestling.net, and it's a lot of fun, and I have some great co-owners in John Powell and Bob Kapoor, but so many great writers and photographers. And I am working on another wrestling-related book. There's a comedian up here in Hamilton, Ontario, called Eric Johnston. And his father was Bullwhip Danny Johnson, who was in the 1990 Starrcade. And his uncle was a wrestler briefly, Randy Johnson. But his grandfather was Bull Johnson, who a lot of people will know because he was certainly a guy who was an enhancement talent all over the Northeast and certainly all up in Canada. He was from Hamilton. And so it's been really neat working with Eric on that. And it's a very, again, like Medusa's book, it's going to be really unique because it jumps over a little bit. Like, we talk about Bull, we talk about Danny, we talk about Randy, we talk about Eric, and Eric weaves his way all the way through this because it's sort of meant to be a kind of thing that he could sell at his comedy shows. So it's been a lot of fun working on that too.
Wow, Big Bull Johnson, one of the first wrestlers I ever saw.
Well,
he used to work for Pedro Martinez in the old NWF in Buffalo, Cleveland, Albany. Because I'm from the Albany, New York area originally, and he would never win, but he was on TV every week.
Well, often he'd be the guy that would bring down the wrestlers from Hamilton, right? So he'd be the one organizing the car ride to bring down all the other jobbers, whether it's Roger Francoeur or Dino Nero or any of those kind of guys. He'd be the one bringing them down.
Had a long career too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, the stories of him alone make it a lot of fun, right? He was basically one of those guys that could fall asleep anywhere. And so there's some just crazy ass stories of that. He was a bit of a kleptomaniac. So there's some stories on that. Just unique stuff. I love these kind of stories. And as we were talking about, though, I'd been collecting for years, right? So I have these interviews. I never knowing I was doing this book. I'd asked, Rotten Reggie Love, like probably 15 years ago, tell me about Bull Johnson. So then he told me all these stories. I don't know sometimes why I do that, but I'm really good at filing stuff, so I know where that stuff is.
What are the chances in 2 of my last 3 shows that Bull Johnson got mentioned? Because 2 shows ago, I had Paige Von Hess Sutherland on, who had nice memories of Bull Johnson. Yep. So what are the chances? That's amazing.
we did interview Paige for the book too, and it would have been great to have her dad still around because they were great friends. But that's the reality of life, isn't it? Not everybody's around forever, so you got to enjoy it while you're here.
I get inspired by people like Paige because she is out there trumpeting her dad with pride after all these years. And like I told her, Kurt was one of the first wrestlers I ever saw in 1970. So it's like he had a long-lasting impact on my wrestling psyche. And to be able to meet somebody like her who knows every nook and cranny of what happened in his career was absolutely amazing to me. And I'm really thankful for people like that. And for people like you. Because you're the writer, you're the editor, you're the type of person that keeps perpetuating good wrestling journalism. And once again, I want to say thanks and congratulations on everything that's happened and everything that's about to happen, because you're about as good as it gets.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we like that. We used to joke that our saying at Slam Wrestling was, pro wrestling journalism doesn't have to be an oxymoron. So there you go.
That's a good one. I agree with that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the one and only Greg Oliver. Greg, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. hang on. We'll be right back after this very quick message.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thewfia.org. That's thewfia.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
Well, that was Greg Oliver, one of a kind. I'll put it this way. You know how you love your favorite musicians, you say they never made a bad album, they never made a bad song. Greg Oliver's never written a bad book. Type his name in the search bar at Amazon and have a blast. All different kinds of subjects, all different kinds of wrestlers and history books. He's as good as it gets. And of course, Slam Wrestling. Check out Slam Wrestling on the interwebs. It is the best. Capital T, capital H, capital E, capital B, capital E, capital S, capital T. The best. I check it out often. Tremendous photographs. Up to the minute news. Terrific articles. Just go there. It's fantastic. As is Greg Oliver. Hold on a sec. That's our theme song. It's performed by Brian T.O. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Our official website at the moment is Outdated Wrestling Hour. Buzzsprout.com, where you can download every single one of our shows. All of our shows are there all the time. Your one-stop shopping for OWH. Also, you can learn about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, where for a tiny, tiny nominal fee, you can get involved with the production of the show, take part in fun Zoom meetings, even win an occasional prize. That's all there is to it. It's your way of helping perpetuate our little project here. So if you're interested, it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, and you can find it at outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Buzzsprout, by the way, is my podcast host, a company that I owe probably 75% of my success to. They have been fan-freaking-tastic every step of the way. So that's it for now. We got a lot coming up. We got some really, really cool guests coming up. And I hope you'll stick with us. Oh, and I want to remind you again of a show that's coming up. We're going to do our first, it's kind of a cop for something I did. You know, I wrote the first couple of 500, PWI 500 articles. Well, now this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour 1970s 100. We're going to pick the top 100 wrestlers of the decade who had the most influence on the sport, and then we're going to explain why for every wrestler. It's like a magazine, only you don't get paper cuts. All right? So that's coming up with Steve Gennarelli from the Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam podcast on the Arcadian Vanguard Network, the gold standard of wrestling podcast networks. So in the meantime, this is Bob Smith talking to you from New York City. I hope you're having a wonderful, still new year. And the way, allow me to say this, peace, love, and take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And as Bob Barker used to say, have your pets spayed or neutered. And if you've seen Drew Carey lately, does he look great? He got skinny, didn't he?